Welcome to our studio, Crusade for Freedom, located in the heartland of America. Our desire is to be a symbol of hope by spreading the message of freedom to millions. We encourage everyone to visit our website at crusadeforfreedom.com. That's crusade, the number 4, freedom.com. Please be sure to subscribe to our website and like us on Facebook. We are so glad you stopped by today and hope you will keep coming back.
This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
What is a critical race theory? It is the philosophy, the social structure that is designed to tear down the current social structure and replace it with, voila, the proponents of critical race theory, so that nobody's in charge anymore, except for the people who will be in charge soon. This is Wretched Radio. To understand critical race theory is to understand why the social justice movement that we are currently seeing in the Gospel Coalition, Southern Baptist Convention, 9 Marks Ministries, Acts 29 Network, we're talking about millions and millions of people here, y'all. Why it's so bad. Not the people. They're just following what they think is a good idea, but it's not. The idea of eradicating racism, pointing it out as a sin, dealing with sexism, of course, all on board. Nobody's standing in a corner saying, we're not going to play that game. But how they're going about doing it is causing division, separation, splitting. Why? Because it's critical race theory at its core. Let me share with you what that is. This is from a book by Neil Shenvi. It was written in 1992, a long review of race, class, and gender. Back then, the terms white privilege, ableism, systemic racism, all found in that book in 1992. So these ideas are not new. These go back. Remember, postmodernism plays a big role in this. Foucault, Derrida, and the other guys that were involved, most of them dead, mercifully, that were promoting a deconstructionist view of everything. How to really read the Bible? Read between the lines. Literally. What's not there? That's what the author really meant. What sort of a hermeneutic is that? A horrible one, and yet the Gospel Coalition is teaching a class on it. It's called the Gospel Coalition Course, Derrida, Foucault, and the Bible. How to bring their thought into conversation with the Bible. The Bible exposes it as horrible, secularist, godless thinking that we reject. That's how we interact with deconstructionism and postmodernism. Richard Rorty, all these guys. We reject it. So 1992, these ideas were already fomenting. It emphasizes, and this is going to sound so familiar to you, and this is another fatal flaw in the social justice movement because it's critical race theory. It emphasizes experience over argument. Experience, and that's look, I do not argue for a second that black people get pulled over indiscriminately. I get it. I totally do. I get it. But that's an experience. That's not empirical data. Okay? Seeing one thing happen, perceiving it in a way that you think was unjust, that's an experience. And look, we want to hear it. And we want to sympathize. Can you imagine having to sit with your teens? This is reality. Okay, this is reality. Now, this is not a condemnation of police at all. Another fatal flaw of this movement. They lionize bad people while they criticize good folks. This is not a critique of the police at all. But what's the reason for that? That's what we need to figure out. Nevertheless, teenagers need to be taught by their parents, if you get pulled over, this is how you act, this is what you say, this is what you do. Otherwise, it could turn ugly. Now, would you like to have that conversation with your child? And you say, well, as a white person, I do have that conversation to respect the police. I agree with that. We have too. But this is different. This is different. And we don't have to argue about this. That a black teenager driving down the road gets looked at differently by a police officer. There's no argument. There's no argument. Again, dealing with why, how we fix that and correct that, That is where we need to be spending our time. Critical race theory, the critical race theory says take those experiences and argue from experience. And that's just not enough. And that is one of the, by the way, law schools, there are a couple hundred law schools that teach critical race theory. But many of them, not all, but some at least, reject it because it's not the way we argue. It's not reason and logic. It all has to do with experience. And we hear that a lot, don't we? This is where Matt Chandler camps. I know some black people who have been pulled over. And that's terrible. Therefore, tear down the structures, get rid of the systemic racism. Correct observation, wrong conclusion. Why? Because it's a part of critical race theory. Premise 1 of critical race theory, there are 4. Human relationships should be fundamentally understood in terms of power dynamics, which differentiates groups into oppressors and the oppressed. Sound familiar? Did you hear all of those tweets that I read? That's why they smell funny to you, because it's critical race theory. We're defining ourselves, who's got the power and the privilege and who doesn't. Another fatal flaw of this movement, because privilege is something God is okay with. Some people have more, some people have less. Whether it's things or faculties, God is okay with that. Some people have different roles. Now, to call it privilege, be envious of it, is to be carnal. That's what Galatians 5, about verse 28, lists about envying, factions, outbursts of anger. Those are carnal things. And a lot of that we're seeing is because human relationships are being defined in terms of power dynamics. That's critical race theory, sometimes called neo-Marxism. It's not classical Marxism because it's not about economic division, bourgeoisie, proletariat, past, present, future, that stuff. This we'll call it Gramscian Marxism, about him from Italy, another time, Gramsci, another time. But this is a Marxism about social things, heterosexuals and homosexuals, males, females, white, non-white. This relationship, all of these relationships viewed in terms of power dynamics and oppressors and the oppressed. That's why intersectionality foments. You see, there are people who are oppressing. Who's at the top of the heap? White, European, Christian males. They're at the top of the privilege heap. And if you are black, you're below them. If you're a lesbian, you're below them. If you're transgender, you're below them. If you're poor, you're below them. Now, if you happen to be a poor black lesbian woman, well, then you're really, really below them, and we need to listen to you more than anybody else. You go, well, what? That's called intersectionality, and it's part of critical race theory. As a white male, you ought to come to see that you are part of the oppressive group inherently in virtue of your gender and race. It's exactly what we're hearing coming out of the Gospel Coalition, MLK 50, Southern Baptist Convention. Exactly it. But this is a book on critical race theory from 1992, not evangelical Christianity. There's only 2 categories of people, oppressor and the oppressed. That's it. Premise number 2. Our identity as individuals is inseparable from our group identity. So why does a particular people group that shares something in common about their identity vote for the same party every time? It's called identity politics. It's part of critical race theory. Our identity as individuals is inseparable from our group identity, especially our categorization as oppressor or oppressed with respect to a particular identity marker. Hence, identity politics. We, as a voting bloc, vote for this group of people or this camp because of our identity, not because of policies, not because of wisdom, not because of skills and capabilities, but because they're for me and my group. It's critical race theory / identity politics. Premise number 3. All oppressed groups find their fundamental unity in their common experience of oppression. That's what unifies these groups, and that is why you don't see feminists upset at Muslims. They're fighting oppression, and they're compatriots, even though Muslims throw gay people off of buildings. They're oppressed, all oppressed, and so it forms a political alliance with these minority groups to throw over the oppressor. Premise number 4 of critical race theory. The fundamental human project is liberation from all forms of oppression. Consequently, the fundamental virtue is standing in solidarity against the oppressor. Now, let me take you back to the tweets that I shared before. Kyle J. Howard, this is where it's at. White evangelicalism, if it wants to become a true ally to black community, it must begin investing financial resources owed back to it because we've been the oppressors. That's Kyle J. Howard. Ed Stetzer, ever notice that people yelling, just preach the gospel, don't worry about social justice? They didn't have ancestors who were enslaved? For the oppressor. Ray Ortlund, Moses renounced his social privilege, choosing to be mistreated with God's people. He didn't just decry his privilege, he crossed the line and left it behind, identifying with outsiders. That's what you're hearing. You are this from Daniel Aiken. Biblical complementarians believe they're called to servant leadership. They'll sacrificially love their sisters in Christ and empower them. J.D. Greer, we need to tear down all hierarchy. What is that? It's critical race theory. Russell Moore, we desperately need a resurgence of women's voices and leadership and women's empowerment. It's time, said Jen Wilkin, as go our seminaries, so go our churches, to reevaluate existing power structures. That is why we reject this movement, not the people, but the movement, because it is based in unbiblical critical race theory ideas. Until tomorrow, go serve your king. Thank you very much for watching one segment. You can listen to 3 more, well, if you can stomach it, for free at wretched.org, iTunes, Android, whatever your listening device is. If you have a plate in your head, you can pick up the program from anywhere around the world, thanks to the ongoing monthly support of our gospel partners. Should you be one of the people who has listened to the program for an extended period of time, meaning more than once, would you please consider becoming a gospel partner so we can continue to proclaim the good news of the gospel? Simply visit wretched.org.